Somewhere around 200 years BC, Archimedes is quoted as saying, "Give me a lever long enough and I can move the world." It was a bold proclamation, but he was right. With the right tool, with a big enough hammer or a sharp enough blade, humans can be capable of anything. It's these tools that we create that separate us from mere animals. And that connection between man and his machines is the story of how we overcame every limitation imposed upon us. In 1986, that connection was made absolute in an era of turbo-powered monstrosities tearing up gravel roads, Japanese technology dominating on a global scale. A few engineers in Germany had something to prove. With finesse and balance, they could combine man with machine in such a way as to be unstoppable. They created something groundbreaking, engineered to be perfectly balanced and capable of anything from the tight corners of city streets to the long banked curves of the green hell. It was unbeatable. What was created was quite possibly the greatest driver's car ever built, and it was called M3. Emblazoned across the hood of some of the finest German cars is a small round emblem, a circle filled with blue and white, symbolizing a white propeller spinning against a bright blue sky. At first glance, it's a simple design, but there's much more to it than meets the eye. The origins of this emblem go back to a time when BMW was more than just an automotive company. It was a force in the world of aviation. And it all traces back to the 1920s, when BMW wasn't just designing high-performance cars, they were also designing aircraft engines that became the envy of the world. In the midst of this era, among the ranks of BMW's engineers, was a man named Willy Messerschmitt. Willy wasn't just another engineer, he was a visionary, someone whose ambitions reached far beyond the Earth's surface. As a young man in the 1920s, Messerschmitt wasn't content with simply working on existing technology. He wanted to break new ground. He was fascinated by the idea of flight, and his passion for it led him to pursue a career in designing airplanes. But Willy Messerschmitt was not someone who could be constrained by the traditional limits of the industry. By the 1920s, Messerschmitt had already established himself as an engineer with a flair for designing record-breaking gliders. His creations were elegant in their simplicity, functional and efficient. However, this was just the beginning. He was far from satisfied with just creating gliders. He had a much grander vision. He wanted to conquer the skies and build aircraft that would rival the most sophisticated machines in the world. But there was one issue. He wasn't satisfied working under the constraints of BMW. He saw his potential and decided that if he truly wanted to make an impact, he'd need to break free. So Messerschmitt did what few dared to do. He left BMW. He told them to get bent and went on to start his own airplane company. This move was bold, but it would later be seen as a pivotal moment in aviation history. However, in retrospect, the timing of his departure wasn't particularly fortunate. At the time, Germany was under the rule of a tyrannical regime, and their ambitions were much larger than just technological advancement. In the 1930s, Adolf Hitler's Germany's military, eager to expand its reach, launched a design competition for new aircraft to help solidify its position on the world stage. This would prove to be Willy Messerschmitt's golden opportunity. While the design competition itself had strict parameters and rules, Willy saw it as his chance to build the kind of aircraft he had dreamed of, an aircraft that would not just soar, but conquer. The competition was fierce, but the rules imposed on it were strict. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, had laid out specific guidelines that Messerschmitt would have to adhere to in order to participate. Rules. In many ways, rules are seen as the enemy of progress, aren't they? Rules restrict us, make things harder, seem like the barrier between imagination and reality. And as many of you have probably noticed, I can tell from your comments that some of you really despise rules. From the Group A restrictions placed on the R32 GTR to Le Mans basically outlawing the 787B after its win in 1991, rules are often seen as obstacles that stifle innovation. They seem like the chain holding back the freedom of creativity, but, as history often shows us, where we find constraints, we often find the spark of innovation. The real magic happens when people are forced to think outside the box, to find new ways around barriers. This is where Willy Messerschmitt's genius would shine. The task he had at hand was clear: design a highly maneuverable single-seat aircraft that could be sold to the public but was really meant to carry a load of guns and soar over London. The challenge was steep, but the design that Messerschmitt would eventually create would be nothing short of revolutionary. Through many sleepless nights fueled by a bit of schnapps and relentless ambition, Willy Messerschmitt delivered. He penned the design of the Bf 109, an aircraft that would soon change the course of aviation history. The 109 was an incredible feat of engineering, a masterpiece that combined form and function in a way that had never been seen before. Its design was revolutionary in its simplicity. It was fast, nimble, and unlike anything the world had seen up until that point. It went into production at a record pace, and soon it was soaring over the skies of Spain, Italy, Poland, and eventually Normandy, Leningrad, and Egypt. The Bf 109, powered by its V12 engine, would go on to become one of the deadliest aircraft of World War II, taking down more planes than any other. 15 of the top aces of the war piloted the 109, most of them scoring more than 200 victories. Erich Hartmann, the top ace of World War II, flew the 109 and shot down a staggering 352 planes. By contrast, the best American pilot of the war managed to take down just 40. In total, the Bf 109's weapons would go on to shoot down over 20,000 enemy aircraft, making it the most effective warplane of the war. But what made the Bf 109 stand out wasn't just its firepower. It was the perfect balance of speed, maneuverability, and power. While it didn't have the most guns or the heaviest armor, the 109 was agile and incredibly fast, able to outmaneuver and outlast its opponents. It wasn't just the machine itself that made it so deadly. It was the skill of the pilot, the ability to make split-second decisions in a life-or-death situation. The 109 embodied the idea that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Its power didn't lie in its individual components, but in how they all worked together, creating a machine that reacted to the needs of its pilot in an instant. Willy Messerschmitt's design wasn't just a machine. It was a tool, one that could practically read the mind of its pilot. And this is the true power of engineering, creating tools that connect with humanity in such a way that they become an extension of ourselves. When we make the right tools, the right machines, there's almost no limit to what we can accomplish. Messerschmitt's Bf 109 showed the world what could be achieved when ingenuity met necessity. It was more than just a plane. It was a weapon that changed the course of history. The automotive landscape of the 1980s was wrought with disaster. Fuel had become scarce thanks to the oil crisis of the 70s. Big gas-guzzling German Autobahn burners were becoming harder to sell. That meant that racing cars being derived from their road-going counterparts were slowly getting smaller and lighter, with more fuel-efficient power plants. In Germany, the king of the small touring car was Mercedes, and this was much to Mercedes's chagrin. You see, the Stuttgart luxury giant had actually canceled the racing program after Audi handed them their assets, which is a story for another time. But you see, Mercedes-Benz's own engineers went rogue. They still wanted to race, so they teamed up with AMG and started building race-ready versions of the 190e anyway. These renegade wrench-turners set their sights on an upcoming series, the Deutsche Tourenwagen Meisterschaft, or DTM. A series started in 1984 to help promote Germany's finest cars and to prove to the world that they were more than stuffy beer snobs and pretzel eaters. Coinciding with the start of DTM, the infamous Nürburgring had just reopened after extensive renovations. To celebrate both the new racing series and the opening of the ring, the Race of Champions was held at the Green Hell, a race consisting of only Mercedes 190Es being driven by the who's who of champion drivers. When the smoke cleared, none other than Ayrton Senna, who we've mentioned a few times before, stood atop the podium. So there in the 1980s was the world celebrating the 190, praising Mercedes-Benz, Ayrton Senna, Green Hell, DTM. It was all making BMW mad as hell, and they weren't going to take it anymore. Unfortunately, BMW was stuck in the past. They were still stuck in the 70s, still racing big heavy cars and kind of not doing a very good job of it. Sure, with the help of Bob Lutz, that Bob Lutz, BMW had created its new M division, an optimistic endeavor to lead all of BMW's motorsports operations. But the reality was that the M division hadn't quite found its footing yet. Their focus? DTM, the Deutsche Tourenwagen Meisterschaft, a racing series that was, by the mid-1980s, one of the hottest commodities in the European motorsport scene. DTM was more than just a racing series. It was a statement, a declaration that Germany's automotive giants could build cars that weren't just luxury cruisers for the Autobahn, but vehicles capable of dominating racetracks, too. It wasn't enough for Mercedes-Benz and Audi to just have a presence on the world stage. They had to prove their supremacy on the racing circuits. And BMW, caught in a race against time, was beginning to feel the heat from its competitors, who were on the rise. The early 1980s had been dominated by the Mercedes 190e and Audi's turbocharged machines. Both had their moments of glory in the Deutsche Tourenwagen Meisterschaft, DTM. A series started in 1984 with the sole purpose of promoting Germany's finest cars and showcasing their engineering might to the world. This was a battle for automotive supremacy, and it was starting to look like Mercedes-Benz and Audi had the upper hand. Mercedes, especially, was beginning to take its role in DTM seriously, and their 190e, backed by AMG, was proving to be a formidable contender. But BMW wasn't ready to just roll over and let their competitors claim the crown. No, they weren't going to let Mercedes-Benz, Audi, or anyone else take the spotlight without a fight. The pressure was mounting, but so was their determination. They weren't going to sit on the sidelines and watch as Mercedes and Audi stole the show. The Germans weren't just racing for trophies, they were racing for national pride, and BMW knew it. However, they had a problem. The BMW M division was still, at the time, working through their own internal challenges. The cars they had weren't cutting it in the DTM series. Sure, they had the 635 CSI, a car that initially put them on the map in the racing world, but it was too heavy. It lacked the performance edge that its competitors like the 190e and Audi's machines had in spades. Mercedes was already taking advantage of new lightweight materials and turbocharging to get the upper hand, and BMW was still struggling to catch up. The writing was on the wall. The future of motorsport was small, lightweight, and efficient. It was clear that BMW needed to rethink their strategy if they wanted to continue competing at the top level of motorsport. They could no longer rely on the bulk and muscle of their 635 CSI. The rules of the game had changed, and BMW needed to get with the program. But they weren't the kind of company to simply accept defeat. Not yet, anyway. They had one thing left in their arsenal, their heritage, and a burning desire to return to their roots of performance. They had the engineers, the know-how, and the passion for racing. But what they needed now was a car that could take on the 190e, the Audi Quattros, and any other challengers that came their way. In a bold move that would define BMW's future in motorsport, the company decided to go all in on the 3 Series. The 3 Series at the time was BMW's bread and butter. It was their best-selling model, but as a road car, it wasn't exactly built for racing. The engine was weak, the chassis too small, and the overall package wasn't competitive in DTM. But BMW's M division saw potential. It wasn't the best car they had, but it could be transformed into something great. The plan was audacious. Take the 3 Series, strip it down to its bones, and rebuild it from the ground up to create the ultimate racing machine. It would be a car that was both road legal and ready to compete in DTM. It was a daring challenge, but it was exactly what BMW needed to prove that they weren't done yet. They couldn't afford to waste any more time with cars that couldn't compete on the track. The future of BMW, as well as its place in DTM, depended on this new creation. The challenge was clear, but the engineering required would be massive. The 3 Series was far from ready to compete with the likes of the Mercedes 190e or Audi's powerful turbocharged machines. So the M division engineers got to work. They started with the basics: power, performance, and weight savings. They had to find a way to make the 3 Series light enough to compete with the best, while still being fast enough to take on the turbocharged machines in DTM. This was no easy task, but with the help of legendary engine designer Paul Rosche, they had the expertise to make it happen. Rosche was a veteran of the BMW M division, having already worked on the M1 engine, which had powered BMW's early motorsport efforts. He knew how to make an engine scream with power while keeping it light enough to fit into a small chassis like the 3 Series. The M division engineers decided to take the BMW M10 engine, a tried and tested 4-cylinder that had been used in previous models, and upgrade it to create a powerhouse capable of taking on the turbocharged giants of the DTM. With a new engine design, a lightweight frame, and a focus on aerodynamics and handling, BMW was well on its way to creating a car that would change the future of motorsport. They made it wider, lighter, and stronger. They used advanced materials, lightweight plastics, and even tilted the windshield for better aerodynamics. The E30 M3 wasn't just a modified 3 Series, it was a completely new car. One built specifically for the track, but also capable of being driven on the road. The time had come. The 3 Series-based M3 was ready for the DTM. The lightweight, high-performance car that BMW had built would now take on the world. But BMW knew that to truly succeed, they needed more than just a fast car. They needed to prove to the world that their dedication to performance, precision, and innovation was unmatched. This wasn't just about building a car that could race. This was about building a legacy. When the M3 hit the DTM track for the first time, it was immediately clear that BMW was no longer the underdog. They were a force to be reckoned with. The car was agile, precise, and incredibly quick. It didn't have the most horsepower on paper, but what it lacked in raw power, it more than made up for with its handling, speed, and durability. In its first season, the M3 dominated the competition. It won races, took podiums, and proved that it was more than just a road car. It was a racing machine. And with the legendary drivers at the wheel, including the likes of Ayrton Senna, the M3 became unstoppable. It was a true testament to BMW's engineering prowess and commitment to motorsport excellence. The M3's success in DTM wasn't just a victory for BMW, it was a victory for the idea that a car built for the road could also conquer the racetrack. The M3 became the ultimate symbol of what BMW could do when they set their minds to something. It wasn't just a car, it was a statement. And it was a statement that would change the course of automotive history forever. The M3's success in DTM didn't just put BMW back on the map, it cemented the M division's place as a leader in motorsport. The car became a legend, and its influence could be felt across the automotive world. It was a car that had been born from the desire to push the limits of performance, to create something that could compete with the very best. And in the years that followed, the M3's legacy would only grow stronger. BMW would continue to build on the success of the E30 M3, refining it, perfecting it, and taking it to new heights. But no matter how far BMW went, the E30 M3 would always remain the foundation of the brand's motorsport legacy. It was the car that changed everything. The car that proved that when you combine passion, precision, and performance, anything is possible. And just like Willie Messerschmitt's BF 109, the E30 M3's power wasn't just in its engine, but in its balance. It was a tool, a finely tuned machine that could do anything it was asked to do. Whether on the track or on the road, the M3 was a weapon, a finely balanced blade waiting to strike. It wasn't just a car, it was the culmination of BMW's vision for the future, a vision that would push them to new heights and change the automotive world forever. Eberhard had a burning passion, a fire that could not be quelled. He wanted BMW on top. No second string to Mercedes, Audi, or anyone else who dared make luxury cars. When Eberhard became CEO, BMW was an unfocused mess. It was the 70s and they were still recovering from World War II. They made the odd motorcycle, some passable cars, and faced the threat of bankruptcy a few times. Eberhard grabbed the company by the reins and pulled it in a new direction. And with the help of the new race-fueled M division and Bob Lutz, he started pushing the company in a brand new direction. Ultimate driving machines, automobiles that would inspire passion in their owners. No longer just mere appliances to get you from A to B and to be discarded when a new model came out. To prove to the public that these were the works of driving passion they claimed them to be. BMW was going to need to win races. So, to fulfill Eberhard's dream, he directed the motorsports division to commit to one task: win. Build BMW's fastest touring car, unleash the full efforts of their motorsports division on DTM, and put Ford, the 190E, and anyone who dared defy them in their place. There was just one problem. A homologated race car needs to be homologated. Unlike the blind eyes turned towards Group B, BMW couldn't exactly build a winning race car without also having a worthy road car. And the best they had on offer at the time was a timid little grocery getter. But it had potential, the 3 Series. A car that is to BMW what the Civic is to Honda, the sales leader, the bread and butter. In the 1980s, BMW's 3 Series had no hopes of competing with the 190E in racing form. It suffered an anemic engine, one that BMW had been using since the damn 60s and barely made 100 horsepower. And the body itself was far too small and narrow for fat racing tires. The 3 Series would need a complete rework to be able to take on the Fords and Benzes on the German tarmac. The rules were simple, though. Whatever you brought to compete in DTM, you had to make a hell of a lot of them. It was the hand they were dealt. The higher-ups at BMW thought, well, fine. If the rule is we have to use a production car, then duck making the 3 Series competitive, we'll just make a race car and sell it to the public. Somewhere, a stuffy German accountant woke up in his bed, sweat dripping down his face, visions of bankruptcy and layoffs in his head. Furiously, the number crunchers swarmed Eberhard's office to demand this undertaking be stopped. BMW would lose money, endless sums, if they tried to sell fast cars to regular customers. Eberhard politely listened, nodded his head, stood up, shook their hands, and ignored everything they told him. You see, his vision was singular. They were going to win at all costs. And so the M division would continue on their important task. This would be the defining moment for BMW, a day when they would stand up, pump up their chest, and punch Mercedes right in the face. And so it was that the M division would be tasked with saving BMW on the world stage. With marching orders in hand, they set about with focused minds on one important task. Roll a 3 Series into a well-lit garage, take everything off of it, strip it down to the chassis, and rebuild it from the ground up with a singular purpose. Win, win, everything. Their first step was figuring out what to power the damn thing with. Like I said before, the 3 Series engine wasn't going to cut it, and the E30 presented a pretty significant problem. It was small. Its short hood couldn't hold some massive power plant in it, so they were going to need to be clever. Luckily, BMW had been making masterworks of internal combustion for some time, and that was in large thanks to a man named Paul Roche. Sound familiar? All of my stories have repeating characters. Paul, who later designed the McLaren F1 engine, was on tap to breathe life into the M3. Paul was a BMW thoroughbred and possibly the greatest engine designer that ever lived. Prior to the E30, he'd had his hands on the race engine made for the middling supercar, the M1. Paul's M88-1 that had run the M1 through its paces in Group 5 was a proven winner, and in the mid-80s, BMW was primed to replace it with the S38, the petrol-burning rocket ship that would power the M5 and M6. But the S38 was far too big for the diminutive M3, and the focus for the M3 was lightweight over sheer grunt. So Roche decided to start with the BMW M10, a straight 4-cylinder BMW had been using since the 50s. It was rock-solid, reliable, and light. Its teeth were cut in Formula One, where it served as the base of the most powerful F1 engine of all time, the 1,500 horsepower M12. For his finishing touches, Paul took the head from his legendary M88 engine and literally sliced off two cylinder banks, welded on a steel plate to cover the hole, and slapped it on top of the M10. Like the M88 before it, the new engine would also get individual throttle bodies and beefed-up internals to withstand the thrashing of high-level racing. The result was a lightweight, durable beast of an engine, the S14, so named because it took Paul Roche only 14 days to design it. While it was small and it wasn't exuberant in its horsepower figures, its bark was as loud as its bite, and the S14 bit hard as hell. Translating the S14 notes to the drive shaft was a Getrag 5-speed with a dogleg layout. Dogleg means that instead of pulling down from first into second, you'd push up to second and pull down into third, a design that's inconvenient in a road car, but on a racetrack where you're shifting from second to third more often, especially when screaming out of an apex, a dogleg shaves tenths of a second. And fractions of a second in DTM were the difference between the podium and the pit. No stone left unturned. The suspension, brakes, and exhausts were all similarly put on the operating table. The focus was weight savings and durability. The M3 had to perform on a track and only see rubber and fuel in a pit stop. It got wider, it got lighter. It even got an extra stud per wheel so that it could handle high G-forces and cornering better on the exterior. The E30 M3 shared very little with the skeleton it was built around. The 3 Series only donated a hood, a roof panel, sunroof, and inner door panels. Everything else was bespoke to the M3. Every detail nudged and sculpted in the name of weight savings or aerodynamics. Gone were steel bumpers replaced with lightweight plastics. The windshield tilted for aerodynamics. The C-pillar flattened and widened to persuade turbulent air to a new rear spoiler. Wider arches enveloped thicker wheels and tires. What remained may have at first glance been a slightly modified 3 Series. But what stood before you at a racetrack or showroom floor was an entirely new car. The M3, a fully prepped racing car that just happened to be road legal. And in 1987, you wanted one. BMW's pace to get the M3 on the racetrack was neck-breaking. In just over a year since they gave the M3 project a green light, the first examples started rolling off the line in March of 1986. BMW accountants, though, were still losing sleep at night. So out of fear, they only released a few into the wild, used as bait to lure people into dealerships where BMW would try to sell them more reasonable cars like the 5 Series. Their plan sort of worked. They got them into the dealership, but they were there to buy an M3, because when they got their eyes on one in the wild, when they saw what it did to the competition on the grueling corners of Bavarian racetracks, it was different from any BMW they'd seen before. Hell, it was unlike anything else on the road. The E30 M3 wasn't a road-going version of a race car. It was the race car. And you could buy it, and you could drive it. Shift that dogleg transmission. Hear the S14 scream straight off the showroom floor. The E30 M3 wasn't just some inconvenient sports car. Its DNA was still a BMW 3 Series. Economic, comfortable, versatile. You could take your wife and kids to dinner on Saturday and then take your M3 to the track on Sunday, and you would win. The E30 M3 was a blitzkrieg of engineering, durability, and agility. BMW initially was afraid no one would buy them very quickly, though they started to fear they couldn't make enough of them to meet homologation requirements. They needed 5,000 examples. They sold 10,000 before the boys of the M factory said, "Nain, no more. We cannot meet demand." The M3 would go on to sell for years, evolving and defining the legacy of the BMW name for generations. It would catapult the BMW M name into the halls of automotive history. It was nearly an accident. They were trying to make a sales leader, but they did anyway. BMW had given the public something they didn't even know they wanted. Purring underneath that emblem of blue and white was a road car with racing blood, a killing machine full of fire and fury that anyone could tame. And like Willie Messerschmitt's BF 109, when you